So welcome everybody back for our panel, the last panel of the East-West Psychology Student Symposium. This panel is roughly fits into the world category of the EWP Cardinal Points, titled Occult and Magical Technologies of Decolonization. Alternate title could be Occult and Magical Technologies of Liberation. I'd like to formally introduce somebody who probably doesn't need much of a formal introduction to everybody here, but it is my honor to introduce Stefan. So Stefan has worked as an adjunct instructor in history and anthropology at the City College of New York, as a lecturer in Jungian studies at the University of Philosophical Research in Los Angeles, and as an adjunct instructor at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where he's taught classes on ensouled writing and Western esotericism. Currently, Stefan is teaching a class on the work of Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von France, and is preparing to teach a class in the fall on the Western magical traditions, holding a BA in comparative religion, an MA in anthropology, and what's the last one? MD IV, something 5?
Masters of Divinity.
Masters of Divinity. Oh, very good. Okay, thank you. And a PhD in the East-West Psychology Department from CIS. His area of research is at the nexus of psychology, religion, myth, symbol, and magic. Thanks, Stefan, for moderating this panel. I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. And thanks for reframing a little bit decolonization. Always makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I feel, because of my positionality, that I don't like to place myself as an expert on this at all, but it gives me an opportunity, being part of a panel like this. It really gives me an opportunity to learn and listen. So I'm looking forward to the presentations. Anyway, the first presentation for this panel is Michel Borgeaud, and the title of Jean-Michel's paper is The Occult Religion of Umbanda, Hybridity, Colonialism, and Invented Traditions. Jean-Michel was born in Paris from a Brazilian mother and Swiss father. Educated in the Waldorf School, he started playing the violin at an early age and graduated from please forgive my terrible French, the Haute École de Musique, Thibaut Varga in Switzerland, before pursuing his musical education at the Guildhall School of Music in London. After pursuing a career as a musician, the teaching of singing led him to the study of psychology and Indian spirituality. After several sojourns in India, Jean-Michel settled in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where he graduated as a psychologist with an internship in mental health institutions and opened a private practice. So without further ado, Jean-Michel.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. When I saw the subject, magical technologies of decolonization, I was really struck by the title because it really fits the intent and the philosophy of the religion of Umbanda, who was really, it's the first Brazilian religion. It was created in 1920s, and its goal was to unite a society that was much divided by the scars of colonization. The context was such that the Black people, the descendants from the slaves, were living in remote places or were living in the slums. The Tsigans were really completely a part of the society, and the descendants from indigenous people had been almost exterminated, or were living also in very remote places. So the dominant force in the society was the Catholic Church and the white people. And the other people were really, were not represented. And Umbanda came as a religious force that wanted to unite all those people around religion, around spirituality. It was the endeavor to create really a national identity. And they did that by occult means. because really the religion of Umbanda is based on the idea of the contact with departed spirits, which it's an idea that was borrowed both from African religions and mainly from the spiritism of Allan Kardec. So what that means is that a medium, a trained person, would enter in a state of trance and will let a spirit or a god take over his body and deliver a message or perform a ritual, something like that. And this is really the central point, the central practice in Umbanda, who is really a magical tradition and a technology. And what the creators of Umbanda did, which is very interesting, is that they wanted to give voice. They wanted to give a symbolical voice or a spiritual voice to all those populations that were actually a part of the society. So channeling already existed in Kardecisim, which is the spiritism of Allan Kardec. It's a religion that was born in the 19th century in France. It's an occult, a more occult version of Christianity, really, that believes in reincarnation, and that was based with the contact with departed spirits. In the 19th century in France, people were very interested in the occult. There was really a very big trend in this sense, and people were doing things like levitating tables and using mediums to contact the dead spirits. And Allan Kardec, he reinterpreted Christianity. He reinterpreted the Christianity through the contact with those departed spirits. So a medium will sit, and mainly through automatic writing, people will ask the medium a question, like, for example, what's the nature of God, or what is the nature of the universe? And then the medium will let his hands, write alone, and then the question would follow. The answer would follow, and he codified this in a doctrine, a new Christian doctrine. And this religion, this spiritism, had a lot of appeal in Brazil because it somehow it was a bridge between the magical practices that came from Africa, that where the contact with the dead was very present, but at the same time it was Christian, it was acceptable. So the situation was like this. People generally were going to the church, for example, on Sundays, but they also had contact with African religions, and in other days they would go to the so-called tereros or places of African religious cults. They will participate in both. And the middle class then started to study spiritism of Allan Kardec and mediumship. And in those circles, it was really a very restricted intellectual circle in Rio, they decided that somehow why the question that arise for them is why, when we incorporate spirits, there is never a spirit from a slave, a spirit from a Tsigan, a spirit from an African god that comes. Why is it always someone white or some saint or some Western figure? So they decided to create a religion where all sorts of entities will be incorporated and given a voice. And through this, the religion of Umbanda was created, which is really a syncretism between Catholicism, the Yoruba cult, the Yoruba religion with the Orishas, and the spiritism of Allan Kardec, mainly with the idea of reincarnation. So what happens in Umbanda is that, for example, when one goes to a center, there is statues of all the Catholic saints, which are also assimilated to certain Yoruba gods. There's the figure of Jesus. And then a medium will be prepared. Several mediums are there. They will enter into a state of trance. and then they will incorporate those spirits. So it can be the spirit of Yemanja, for example, it's the name of an Orisha, or an Eshu, which is another African god. Or it can be a Tsigan, it can be what we call a Caboclo, which is an indigenous person. And then those entities will give counseling to the people. And so this new form of religion really had a very big appeal, because somehow all parts of the population could identify with it. And also it was a way for the elite people, for the white people, to start to give value to parts of the population that before were totally rejected. So, for example, it's quite revolutionary in the context of Brazil. For example, a white person from a well-known family, established, for example, as a doctor, that goes to a center and then somehow participates from a ritual where he's going to receive counseling from the spirit of a slave, for example, which are the, okay. So really, through this, a Brazilian religion was created. Now, there are some points that are really questionable about it. Somehow it became a success because I would say it's the religion nowadays that really represents the national imaginary, the national religious feeling. There is really a sense of belonging, which is what they intended. But at the same time, it is very different from traditional indigenous practices, for example, African practices, like a real Yoruba religion, like, for example, the Candomblé. Or it is also very different from authentic indigenous religious practices, like, for example, we find in the Amazons. It's really a hybrid product. It's an invented tradition. So it is something that borrowed elements, some elements from the Candomblé, which is the traditional African religions. It borrowed some elements from indigenous practices. It borrowed some elements also from the Tsigan culture, but it recreated something absolutely different from it. And now it coexists with the traditional African religion. It coexists as well with, shamanism, so-called shamanism, as we can find it in the Amazon. So it is somehow also a certain form of cultural appropriation that happened. But it was somehow accepted by the population, and it is not seen as such. It is only seen as such by people that really go very deeply into this subject. Umbanda nowadays is not something unified as well. It's a religion that is very fluid. So there is no central doctrine, or there's nothing very dogmatic. It is rather an experiment that people do through the contact with the other world and through the spirits, in a very creative way, in a very artistic way, I would say. Some terreiros, some houses are also crossed. So that means that they will practice African religion, and they will practice Umbanda. And I will say the main difference, for example, in Brazil, is that African religions has some aspects that are very difficult to assimilate for most people that come from a Western origin or Western culture. Like, for example, blood sacrifice, animal sacrifice. This is an aspect that is very difficult, and that it doesn't exist in Umbanda. So in Umbanda, you have the calls to the Orishas, but we don't sacrifice, people don't sacrifice animals, for example, for the Orishas. in Umbanda as they do in Candomblé. So Umbanda has stripped away everything that was too radical for the Western mind to assimilate. And it took the aesthetic of it, the aesthetic of those traditions. And also it is a religion that is very confessional. And in this sense, it really stands in continuity with Christianity. Like people that will consult with the entities in Umbanda, each week there is a different entity. There are different entities. Like for example, one week is the caboclos, which is the indigenous people that are going to be channeled by the mediums. Another week, it is the Tsigans. Another week, it is the Orishas. But every week people are going to consult. That means that they are going to speak with the mediums. They are going to speak with the mediums while they are incorporated to receive advice on healing, on their marriage, possibly to receive some magical way of healing themselves, things like that. And they will also probably talk about their most intimate problems and receive an answer from the medium. And in this sense, it is very much in continuity with what happens in the Christian confession. This kind of practice is not present in that way in indigenous practices and in Candomblé not at all. In Candomblé, I would say in most African cults, the entities are incorporated, but they rarely communicate directly with the people. They are somehow above humanity in this sense. So there was an adaptation. This really suffered an adaptation in Umbanda to fit the society. But it is a space of creativity. It is a space of cultural belonging and of occult practices that are considered normal. So I think this is the difference, the main difference between South America and I would say America. From what I know is that for us in Brazil, the occult and the magical are part of our daily life, maybe because of the influence of this religion mainly, and of African religions. Somehow it really gave an opportunity to unite certain populations that were really apart. So in a Terreiro of Umbanda, you can have a doctor and you can have a bus driver. And generally, the most important, functions in the Terreiros, in the centers, are given to the people that are less higher in the society. This is done intentionally as well to counterbalance the forces inside the society. So yes, I don't know if you have any much more questions. I decided not to read the paper because I realized that if I read the paper, it was going to be far too long to read the paper. So I prefer to do it like this.
I think that's great, Jean-Michel.
Yeah.
We're going to, I think we'll save questions till the end. So, I mean, do you have anything else that you want to share right now? Are you okay?
Well, yes, I would say that nowadays there is a movement in Umbanda that wants to reconcile Umbanda with traditional roots. So in certain days, people will practice Umbanda. In certain days, people will practice Candomblé, and also a very big a very big movement inside of Umbanda is the introduction of the Ayahuasca inside of Umbanda rituals. So I participate a lot from those rituals. They're very powerful. When people take Ayahuasca, which come directly from the Amazon inside the Umbanda ritual. So it's another way, it's something new as well. It's something, it's another form of Umbanda. So it's an open possibility. I would say it's a religion that is still in formation, that is both trying to go back to its roots, and it's also envisioning possible futures in many different ways. It's extremely plural. So in this sense, I think it holds many possibilities.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next presenter is Kathy Stanley. And Kathy's paper is entitled Processing Decolonization. Kathy Stanley is an MA, an artist, eco-psychology educator, and senior adjunct lecturer in the School of Undergraduate Studies at CIIS, where she teaches the classes Listening to Earth, Ecology, Art, and the Spirit of Place, The Art of the Essay, and Reading into Writing. She is a PhD student in the East-West Psychology Department, and has a website. If you're interested, Sacred Arts Journeys, one word, sacredartjourneys.com. I'll put it into the chat. Anyway, Kathy.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So my paper is titled Processing Decolonization. I begin with this quote: "The problem of decolonization, whether of the colonized or the colonizer, is primarily a recovery of psychological liberation, which is the intuition of the one in the many. It is secondarily an application of this liberation in one's relations with selves and others." So Professor Banerjee made this comment in a discussion in a class last fall that he taught, the Modernity, Colonialism, and Transcultural Hermeneutics class. So I used that quote as a reflective theme to examine the recovery of psychological liberation regarding decolonization, using a specific spiritual psychology method of self-inquiry. And the goal in question is how we can move more effortlessly towards psychological liberation and realization of the one in the many. So the spiritual psychology technique I will be describing and demonstrating is contained within a body of teachings titled The Marriage of Spirit, from spiritual teacher Leslie Temple Thurston. And it's described in her book, The Marriage of Spirit, Enlightened Living in Today's World, a book co-authored with Brad Laughlin. I've been a student of Leslie Temple Thurston for the past 27 years, working extensively with these methods personally and in group settings. And I believe it's a relevant, useful method in which to examine the complexities regarding the issue of decolonization. And I'm interested in how this method may be used as a practical application to assist groups who may be interested in working together in the efforts towards decolonization, and how we get to that recovery of psychological liberation. So this is a self-inquiry method rooted in wisdom from Eastern traditions and blended with Western psychology. It works well on an individual, mental, emotional level, and it's even more beneficial, I would say, when used by groups with common interests. The marriage of spirit processing techniques aim for liberation from polarized, separate states of consciousness inherent in the human experience and playing out in archetypal patterns such as victim, tyrant, rebel, savior. So this is a quote from the text, the Marriage of Spirit text. The teachings are a way to recreate balance and harmony in the midst of ordinary everyday consciousness. They are a deceptively simple way of addressing and clearing conditioned egoic patterns. The techniques have the potential to create an immediate easing of the problems arising in our lives from the knotted, limited, and unconscious places in our patterning. The primary principle is this: by unifying all opposites held in our awareness, we will return to our original state of unity. Consciousness in this world is polarized into pairs of opposites. We see opposites all around us, and we hold states of mind which are polarized opposites. So the overarching goal of the work is the reconciliation of opposites. And any survey of news reports these days show tyrants now acting as victims, victims act as tyrants, saviors run around trying to save everyone, only to become burnt out victims of their own efforts. Rebels become tyrants. No one wins in this toxic melee. Professor Banerjee at one point described it as this Tower of Babel moment. So archetypes of colonizer and colonized are contained within the overall patterns of victim and tyrant. And one of the texts that we read in the class is Leela Gandhi's Post-Colonial Theory, A Critical Introduction, and a quote from the text: modern colonialism enacted another kind of violence by instituted enduring hierarchies of subjects and knowledges, the colonizer and the colonized, the Occidental and the Oriental, the civilized and the primitive, the scientific and the superstitious, the developed and the developing. The colonized was henceforth to be postulated as the inverse or negative image of the colonizer. And so Leela Gandhi also describes the complicated process of motivations of colonizer and colonized by saying the colonized's predicament is at least partly shaped and troubled by the compulsion to return a voyeuristic gaze upon Europe. So the marriage of spirit technique is built on the foundation that within the human being, all of the polarized states of consciousness may surface within the individual. It means acknowledging through self-inquiry that I can experience being the tyrant as well as the victim as well as the tyrant in another instant. I can act out the role of savior and rebel equally. However, bouncing around inside these archetypal patterns is a cause of distress psychologically. It's disempowering and awful to feel like a victim. It's shameful to feel like I have acted as a tyrant towards another person. It feels exhausting to act the savior or the rebel, only to be constantly disappointed that I was not able to move the needle enough in the direction of freedom and justice. So I've watched people working at the intersection of social justice and education sort of collapse under the psychological weight of feeling this shame and being burdened by the issue of decolonization. And clearly this is a complicated time which calls for strengthening of our inner psychic muscles, for psychological liberation, even as we work towards social justice. So the first step in this technique that I'm going to demonstrate is to develop a strong internal witness, an observer self. The internal witness can step outside of the polarized states of consciousness and hold a state of neutrality, allowing and recognizing that while the feelings of victimization may be passing through me today, tomorrow the rebel or the tyrant may get activated. So I hold my state of neutrality with my witness self. And I like this quote that Leslie has: the witness is an opening from the limited personal mind into the universal mind. And since my witness self is activated as I do this process of radical self-inquiry, I can approach it from a place of empathy and compassion for all of these parts of self that bounce around in my consciousness. So this is a technique called the square. And the first thing we do is we identify a polarity that feels charged for us. So in this case, we're going to look at the polarity of the colonizer versus the colonized. And we flush out 4 quadrants of this technique called a square. We look at the desire to be a colonizer, the fear of colonizing, being a colonizer, versus the desire to be colonized, versus the fear of being colonized. And so I'm going to do a brief sketch of what the 4 quadrants might look like. And I'll be trying to capture some current as well as historical motivations regarding the colonizer and the colonized. And this is going to be an incomplete list. This is a process that works well in groups, because in a group you get to have more eyes on the issue. Of course, something like this, you could spend an entire day or an entire weekend just on this one square. So let's look at the desire to be a colonizer. Pretty obvious: gain material wealth, property, resources, knowledge, power, have control and power over people, lands, material wealth, to be free from tyranny from others, such as kings, gain independence, sovereignty, spread the teachings of my religion, which will save others. Fear of colonizing, of being a colonizer, hated by others, accused of being tyrants, thieves, abusers, murderers, displacement from my land of birth, burdensome sense of shame, puts a target on self for being a bad person, a bad people. My efforts are misinterpreted. The desire to be colonized, have someone else run things. I want what the colonizer has. And there's this quote from Mahatma Gandhi in the Leela Gandhi book: we want the English rule without the Englishman. You want the tiger's nature, but not the tiger. I want to be like the colonizer, less responsibility. Being a victim may be attractive to the ego, as being colonized garners empathy and saving by others. And fear of being colonized, my power and agency is taken away. I'm victimized, killed, abused, used for others' benefit. My land is stolen. I'm no longer in control of my life. I'm a slave for others. I have no voice. My tradition's stolen. My intellectual and spiritual knowledge is stolen from me. I'm blamed for being weak and allowing myself to be colonized. I'm made into a subhuman being, the subaltern. So once I've fleshed out all of the quadrants of the square, the most important step is the last. This is where I offer the whole thing up to the universe, to the infinite, to the one, to whatever higher transcendent power, intelligence feels appropriate. I ask for grace and for clearing of the separate states of consciousness so that I may come into greater unity within. into greater integrity, balance, and awareness. So it's just a prayer. I hereby offer up all of my desires and fears around the polarized states of being a colonizer and of being colonized. I ask for grace and for clearing of these separate states within me. I ask that these be cleared so I may come into greater integrity, greater impeccability in my relations with others, and for wholeness and unity within. I give thanks as I know it will be done. So the invitation after doing it and doing the completion of the offering of prayer is to wait for grace. Usually we would do in a group setting, we would sit in meditation. In my 27 years of doing this type of processing work personally and in groups, my experience is that a shift inevitably takes place. Grace arrives and clears a space. And even the clearing of a small space inside is a step towards psychological liberation. Leslie would say, spirit will handle it. There's nothing more to do. And new insights may come. There may be other processes that present. And I like to do a kind of a closing ritual after something as big as this, something like a fire ceremony to release all of it for cleansing. So I believe there's a great need for methods that are practical and efficient in assisting with psychological liberation from being caught in archetypal patterns around victim, tyrant, rebel, savior, colonizer, and colonized. A quote from Leslie, in times like this, there's a heightened potential for, and even an imperative need for a great number of souls to wake up to a new, more balanced human consciousness. For those that are disturbed by these global crises, the most profound way to make a contribution is by practicing self-inquiry and clearing one's own ego as our awareness becomes more empowered. And as we hold an intention along with others for global transformation, our intention joined with others begins to affect collective consciousness. Some may know this as the 100th monkey principle. I like to call this principle the power of one, because it reflects the power inherent in the one mind, the universal unified mind that is common to all of us at some level. So I found great resonance with Professor Banerjee's statement in her class about the intuition of the one in the many and needing psychological liberation around this issue. So my final thoughts, I've presented here a brief sketch of one way to approach processing decolonization. I believe that methods such as the marriage of spirit, spiritual psychology processing technique may support greater awareness of archetypal forces and move us towards psychological liberation. Processing decolonization is clearly one of the big collective psychological endeavors of our time, requiring myriad methods and tools to support liberation. So it's my hope that more and more of us can work through these issues without collapsing under the weight of it and without projecting our own shadow sides onto others. So these are my references, and I thank you for listening. I'll stop my share.
And now we're coming to our final presentation of the day, Adryanna Sadge. His Dark Materials, Spiritual Implications for a Postmodern Magical World. And Adryanna Sadge, a PhD student in the East-West Psychology program at CIIS, graduated spring 2021 with an MA in Mental Health Counseling, Contemplative Psychotherapy, and Buddhist Psychology from Naropa University. Around December 1999, Adryanna made the difficult decision to walk away from Christianity to forge a new path while continuing to reside in a predominantly Christian area. In a bid to discover her place in this spiritual, religious, atheistic constellation, a seed was planted. What needs to happen for all living beings to feel the possibility of creating and humbly claiming their space, especially in an extremely divisive age. Adryanna?
Thank you, Stefan. Give me just a second. Let me get my screen set up. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am grateful to be with each one of you and to have received such beautiful offerings. Welcome to His Dark Materials, Spiritual Implications for a Postmodern Magical World. Due to a lack of space, references for the material and all images are available upon request. I stumbled across His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman around August 2021. After diving into Pullman's world, I felt a poignant sense of expansion and curiosity about any real-world spiritual and religious implications. How might reframing the story of original sin from one of temptation, betrayal, and forsaking, to that of a woman and a man gifted with higher consciousness and entrusted to be the stewards of earth, impact the evolution and developments of our world? While writing this paper, I utilized divination cards to guide the exploration. Through the messages of those cards, spontaneous identification of symbols unraveled and spiritual messages were revealed. The Transformation Oracle deck guided the analysis of the first book. The energy of these cards allows the seeker to explore their current query through the lens of a transformative journey. The card pulled from the Golden Dawn Ritual Tarot, heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian mysticism, may represent trickster energy by challenging us to broaden our perspectives. Lastly, the Mother Peace Tarot deck offered a motherly voice that can identify the root of the issue and hold our lived experiences without invalidating or enabling. Sonia Shannon, creator of the Transformation Oracle deck, suggested that through compassion, conscious awareness, and doing inner work on our own dark tendencies, we can salvage the treasures from our most difficult life experiences, insinuating that the purification process requires love and honesty. Purification, rooted in the elements of fire, may indicate a period of cleansing or destruction. Agrippa described fire as a consuming, life-giving energy that might drive away dark spirits or destroy lands. Duquette depicted fire as the spark that sustains and finally consumes and transforms all existence. In The Golden Compass, protagonist Lyra Blackwell, a 12-year-old girl, encountered situations that asked not only her, but also her friends and adversaries to embark on a journey of purification. For example, Lyra watched the master of Jordan College attempt to poison Lord Asriel, but later learned that the master wanted to protect her. In another instance, Lyra assisted the king of armored bears, Yorick Burnson, in retrieving his armor and taking back his throne. Lyra then challenged Yorick to walk away rather than kill the men who attempted to enslave him. Lyra also saved Roger from the General Oblation Board, created by the Magisterium's consistorial court of discipline, only later to unknowingly escort Roger to his death. Lyra confronted fire's creative and destructive nature when her father, Lord Azrael, forcefully separated Roger from his demon. Lastly, after moving in with Mrs. Coulter, Lyra became acquainted with her mother's temper by mentioning dust. Pullman's symbolism may remind the reader of the duality of one's nature, like holding both light and dark inside. The subtle energies that influences one's life, such as the authority, and fear of the unknown force, like dust. Humans are born with demons in Lyra's world. Until a child reaches puberty, the demon may change shape and match their human's current disposition. If either human or demon died, the other did as well. Demons also served as literal representations of someone's nature and an external manifestation of one's ego. A severed child, on the other hand, was forcefully separated from their demon, which Pullman described as someone without a face, or with their ribs laid open and their heart torn out. Lord Azrael, while researching dust, captured pictures of it streaming from the sky and settling on adults. In Lyra's world, after Eve ate the apple, the authority cast her and Adam out of the garden. The church categorized that event as the moment sin entered the world and demons became fixed. A parallel to the Spanish Inquisition in our history, non-believers, including indigenous people, were converted or murdered due to the Vatican's enactment of the 1493 Doctrine of Discovery. Similarly, the magisterium punished or executed anyone attempting to further the understanding of dust beyond its link to original sin. While Lyra initially set out to rescue Roger, she honed her intuitive skills by challenging herself to read the alethiometer, a truth-telling device that allowed Lyra to receive intuitive answers to questions by interpreting the symbols selected by the device. After Father Quorum witnessed Lyra accurately reading the alethiometer, John Faw, leader of the Egyptians, who might be best known as the Romani people in our world, allowed Lyra to accompany them to rescue the children and Lord Azrael. Mrs. Coulter, the head of the General Oblation Board, used her charm to lure children away from their families. The magisterium believed severing the link between child and demon prevented sin from corrupting the child. Likewise, leaders of Christianity who practice conversion therapy may fragment individuals exposed to the unnatural process of altering one's sexual orientation. A spiritual message from the first book. It is not enough to identify and immobilize entities such as the magisterium, but one must also engage in inner work to identify, heal, and reframe harmful messaging and destructive ways of being. Cicero and Cicero explained that archangels burn away the impure aspects of the candidate. They test and try him, and ultimately they initiate his triumphant rebirth. Duquette attributed the element of fire relating to judgment as the central fire of life, or Holy Spirit. In The Subtle Knife, protagonists Lyra and Will Perry, a 12-year-old boy from a different world, find themselves repeatedly tested as they embark on a quest to learn more about dust and to search for Will's father. In the beginning, Lyra and Will needed to learn to trust each other. They also encountered wild, primitive-like children in the adultless town of Chittigatsi. The alethiometer also challenged Lyra to tell the truth and prioritize Will's quest over her ambition to learn more about dust. Lyra relied on fictional storytelling, a term I am using to indicate skillful lying, in the previous book to evade capture. When she re-entered Will's world, Lyra's lies quickly unraveled. Lyra chose to ignore the alethiometer's guidance to meet Mary Malone, a physicist in Will's world who researched shadow particles. Two skillful interrogators tricked Lyra into giving up Will's name and her identity, which Mary then helped Lyra escape. Lyra then accepted a ride from Sir Charles, who subsequently stole her alethiometer. Sir Charles then promised to return the device if they retrieved the subtle knife for his collection. Mary followed Lyra's suggestion to program the cave, a computer engine created to communicate with dust, to display words rather than pictures. Lyra connected with the cave as she did the alethiometer, which displayed images that corresponded with Lyra's questions. Likewise, when Mary reprogrammed the cave to speak words, she confirmed dust was conscious. Unbeknownst to Lyra and Will, each misstep brought them closer to fulfilling their mission and increased the power of opposing forces like Sir Charles and Mrs. Coulter. When Lyra used the alethiometer in the library, unaware that Sir Charles had been observing her, she unwittingly provided genuine truths, despite giving Sir Charles a fake name and reason for being in Will's Oxford. Sir Charles remembered Lyra, but allowed her to believe she had fooled him. He then created a situation in which Lyra and Will would have to retrieve the subtle knife for him. The alethiometer positioned Lyra to advance Mary's understanding of shadow particle and shadow matter. Lyra unknowingly behaved as a spiritual change agent by helping Mary connect with the more abstract elements of the world, like dust, walking between worlds, and talking with demons. The angels in Pullman's trilogy influenced specific characters to serve the goal of exacting vengeance against the authority and physically appeared when needed. They used moments such as when Lyra endangered Will and their mission to prepare Lyra to step consciously into the role of a spiritual change agent. The subtle knife personified a limited understanding of judgment. The bearer could use the subtle knife to ward off the specters, quickly escape, or steal from those who inhabited those worlds. While the true intentions of the subtle knife remained unknown, the previous knife bearer alluded to a mysterious power that allowed the specters to enter Cittàgazze. It became a world where children roamed freely before puberty, and adults became lifeless shells mentally imprisoned by the specters. A spiritual message from the second book. In the process of wielding a tool that contains much power and wisdom, one may easily forget that the power being wielded might not be one's own. According to the Mother Peace Tarot Guidebook, the woman performs magic and appears deeply connected with her intuition. In this space, the woman allows time for the spontaneous arising of insights and wisdom. Agrippa suggested that spiritual regeneration required the elements of water, and Craig described water as being fluid, buoyant, and malleable. Duquette linked the Seven of Cups with the fixed zodiac sign Scorpio, most likely indicating an alignment with one's most authentic nature, higher self, or the divinity within. In the Amber Spyglass, Mary's discoveries lent themselves to preparing not only herself, but also Lyra and Will for their respective roles in the prophecy, Eve, Adam, and the serpent, respectively. When Mary entered the strange world of the Malefa, she noticed a familiar intelligence in the eyes of the Malefa and the way they released the oil so the wheel pod trees and other living entities could survive. Mary also invented the Amber Spyglass by using the special sap from the wheel pod trees and oil from the seed pods to create a special lens that could detect dust, which revealed dust quickly leaving the Malefa's world. Mary figured out that the subtle knife caused dust to leak from all worlds since its creation around 300 years ago. She also knew the mass exodus of dust needed to cease before all conscious life, including humans and the Malefa, perished, leaving nothing but a brutish automatism. By playing the serpent, the creature known for tempting Eve, Mary taught Will and Lyra about the deep, unwavering love that exists between one or more people. Still, she presented them with one final task: prevent dust from leaving the worlds. Lyra and Will also encountered situations requiring each child to make choices aligned with a higher purpose. Once in the world of the dead, Lyra uncovered the origin and purpose of the specters, established a way for ghosts to earn safe passage out of that world, and released friends who had since passed away. Will used his time away from Lyra after Mrs. Coulter kidnapped her to hone his skills with the subtle knife. He sensed a familiarity with his world that appeared different from the openings to other worlds. Unbeknownst to Lyra and Will, each misstep, each misstep increase, I'm sorry, I feel like I've already read that. Okay, I know what happened. Okay. After Eve and Adam ate from the tree of knowledge and discovered their nakedness, or became self-aware, the Christian God cast them out into a world laden with sin. While the magisterium continued to view the serpent as an agent of original sin, Mary demonstrated compassion, wisdom, and grace as she helped the Malefa and gently guided Lyra and Will on their final journey. Once Mary learned about the subtle knife's dual nature and the max exodus of dust, she knew to work with Lyra and Will to prevent consciousness from leaving all worlds. The world of the dead, a prison camp founded by the authority towards the beginning of his reign, symbolized a bardo deliberately used to perpetuate the ruling authorities' fear-mongering propaganda to prevent a revolution or the spontaneous rising of wisdom and insights. When Lyra traveled to the world of the dead, she negotiated the ghost's freedom by suggesting the harpies demand true stories from them to determine their worthiness. Once the ghosts were free from the prison, the fabric of their ghost-like bodies loosened and joined the cosmos. The final book offered this message: catastrophic mistakes may sometimes require catastrophic sacrifices to make it right. However, in the gentleness, ease, and grace of the heart, one may surely find the path through the dark. Pullman relegated the Christian God to that of a controlling, abusive father who tricked the other angels into believing he created the world. The authority might better represent pre-modern Christian leaders who potentially reframed the original story of Eve and Adam into one of original sin, effectively controlling access to spiritual truths for many centuries, as evidenced by the Spanish Inquisition, attempted genocide of the original peoples all over the world, including the United States and Canada, and subsequent burning of witches. Were they angry with Eve for separating them from the kingdom of heaven to know wisdom, the same as the divine? Did they seek to control and shrink this expression of knowledge so the Christian God would forgive them and return them to the kingdom of heaven one day? Shannon suggested that one find a light inside the difficulty and the gift wrapped in a problem. Lyran will encounter the darkness within, befriended their nature, and made one of the most difficult decisions: to forgo cultivating their love for the good of all sentient beings. So I have this feeling that I skipped something that I really wanted to share, but I'm not 100% on that. So I will just go with the flow and just say this concludes my presentation. I thank each of you for your time and attention. And I'll stop sharing.
So much, Adryanna. Jonathan, how are we doing on time? Jonathan.
Perfect. Yeah, we're doing right on schedule. If you we have another, well, I guess another 25 minutes before this panel is supposed to finish. So if you have some remarks, some thoughts, some stories to share with us based on the 3 panels, and then we can open it up to Q&A.
Well, me first. Well, I was interested, there was been kind of a theme, I guess, throughout all of the presentations, which is, you know, finding kind of like a thread that ties each of the presentations within each of the sessions together. And I was thinking that with these 3, we had discussed this beforehand, that these 3 are very different from one another, very disparate, as you might expect in the world category, because it covers a lot of territory. And yet, for me, I found that there was a kind of a common thread. Now, I know that this is for me, and it may not resonate with everyone, but the thread for me was the imagination, and the way in which the imagination is used as a tool for uniting opposites, for uniting things that have fallen apart, things that are in disarray, things that are in tension, things that are in conflict with one another. And I found this in all 3 of them. When Jean-Michel, when you were speaking, I was thinking that there are quite a number of religions throughout history that have been not only created, I mean, you can think of them, many religions, as revitalization movements from within existing religious traditions, but there are many syncretic traditions where cultures come into conflict with one another. And the one that popped into my head, only because it's a region of the world that I'm becoming more and more fascinated with, is the religion of Serapis, or Serapis, from Egypt, which was a syncretic religion that was trying to unify the Egyptian mind and the Greco-Roman mind. And the images, although Serapis is an image of both, is kind of a union of Osiris and the Apis bull, which are both Egyptian, the image of Serapis is one of Hades. And Serapis is considered to be the king of the Apsu, which is the watery deep. So he's a god of the descent and rebirth. And I really felt that really kind of powerfully in the presentation that you were giving about the way in which a culture that's in disarray or in conflict can from within itself begin to generate its own, what Jung would call, transcendent function, its own living symbol that helps unite what has been kind of torn asunder within a culture. And then I thought within Kathy's also, Kathy, when you were talking about what Debashish was calling a kind of Tower of Babel or Tower of Babel moment within our culture, I was also thinking of something that Rudolf Steiner often talked about, which was this period that we're entering into being the period of the war of all against all, where communication breaks down, people are unable to understand one another. And how do we find then living symbols that can help unite us, help us transcend the opposites, the oppositions within which we find ourselves? And you gave a really wonderful kind of explanation, or what would be the right word, exegesis of one method that's been developed for helping us to unite these oppositions of a culture that's in conflict. and Adryanna, who introduced me to the works of Pullman, and I will be forever thankful for that because his work is really extraordinary. Through your own work, which is highly imaginative, through the use of the cards. I mean, this was done for a class on the Western magical traditions, utilizing many of the different elements that came within that course to find a way to work kind of aesthetically, but also imaginatively through the book, and find ways to kind of describe what it was that was happening within the narrative of the book through these imaginal tools, especially through the tool of the tarot. And I saw that this was also this idea of the transcendence of opposites, of the union and the transcendence of opposites, is really is at play within Pullman's work. And I loved I haven't gotten to the final book yet, but I love this idea of playing the serpent. That the serpent, you know, if you look at the serpent from a kind of orthodox Christian viewpoint, the serpent brings evil and sin into the world through the woman. But if you look at it from a more Gnostically inflected approach, the serpent brings compassion, wisdom, and grace, and is an agent of evolution. And this idea that missteps are necessary to increase the oppositions, because it's only through the increase of the oppositions that things can come to a head. And it's, as you know, Jung always talks about, it's through the holding of the tension of the opposites that the transcendent function, that third thing, the tertium non datur, that third thing that does not exist, actually comes into being and can help lift us out of the problems within which we find ourselves. So anyway, that was just my way of kind of dealing with this tremendously diverse and rich array of ideas that the three of you presented. I don't know, Jonathan, should we ask the panelists to comment on that, or do you want to take questions? How would you like to proceed?
I think we're open. I think if any of the panelists want to comment on that, that'd be more than welcome. And after that, we can open to questions.
Yeah, I guess I just want to say thank you, Stefan. Yeah, the way that you summarized that, and I really appreciate the way that you brought out the opposing forces. Yeah, that was something that I tried to continually show throughout show throughout the presentation, just the importance of the integration of the light and the dark. And like you said, how you beautifully put that when those two different forces come into opposition, a third thing, a third thing can come from that. And I think that's beautiful, the way that you shared that. I just want to say thank you.
Stefan, I also really appreciate everything you said, especially about the integrative power of imagination, which I think is so important for psychological wholeness. And of course, in the religion that I presented, it's really a religion of the imagination somehow, that the imagination becomes the portal. I would say maybe it's an imaginatio vera, as maybe Jung could say, to another reality. And many people have, through imagination, many people have lived a profound psychological states of integration through these experiences of channeling entities, which psychologically could be very well understood as dissociated complexes. Parts of the unconscious that are there, that are not integrated, and that through ritual comes this possibility of expressing, this kind of things. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm wondering, should we take questions or comments?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I could jump in if there's a moment here, because it seems as though a couple of the themes that just came up in terms of imagination and the idea of invention, especially when it comes to history, the relationship with history, inventing a relationship to history and through history, with history, right? Tradition, for instance. It's just a very interesting question, because without approaching these things as porous, without approaching it with some kind of imaginative and magical power, if you will, then it seems as though that's when tradition can very much close in on itself, and you get something that is static, that is outside of you, that you are either subjugated to, or you internalize and then desire or to become, and I think that it's just a very interesting combination of ideas here, because in a sense, all tradition is invention, because I think that's where the imagination is coming from, is people that are innovating, people that are challenging the status quo, or challenging their oppressors. And at the same time, the same idea of imagination can be used to better oppress, and so it's a double-edged sword for sure. But at the same time, I think that it's hard to think without imagination, like think tradition, think history without imagination. The two go hand in hand for me. And I guess the question in terms of how to situate that in the contemporary times is that in the polarized times, right, that you were talking about, Kathy, like it seems as though we are being targeted as kind of targeted to I guess internalize certain archetypes, if you will. We're being targeted to have certain ways, I guess, of relating to the archetypes or imagining the archetypes. And that's where I'm going with this, is that I think that, people have said that that are unconscious. Like, first of all, you kind of colonize through consciousness, and you very directly through physical force, like biopolitics. And then you get to psychopolitics, which is really colonizing through psychologies. And that becomes internalized. And then you have something like advertising, kind of in the digital capitalism. Advertising is really kind of mining and colonizing the unconscious. And that's where my question comes, is that it seems as though that also is, imagination is also at risk. It's contested. How can we imagine? What are the conditions of imagination in itself? And how is it that when we try to interpret or wrest freedom or liberation for ourselves, how is it that we're not, or how is it that we can avoid some of the more subtle technologies which are really at work in wresting potential through conscious, unconscious, and therefore even imaginative ways? So that was just a little bit of a response, I guess, but
thanks, Jonathan.
I just haven't spoken all day other than my presentation, so I wanted to sort of respond somehow. Thanks for listening.
Dana. Oh, you're not hearing. Muted.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yep.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to segue right from that. That's great. I'm going to point to Jean-Michel. I have a question. It's always fascinating to me how beliefs become established. And you mentioned that Umbanda is a evolving practice. So my question is, who steers it? How does it get steered and established?
Steered means what? Sorry, I don't know this word. What does it mean, steered?
To drive.
Yeah, okay. So actually there are 10 different sort of big schools of Umbanda. But within this, I would say that almost every center has its own characteristics. So the centers are directed by generally the people that founded them, which we call them the mother and the father of saints being the entities. So generally you receive the authorization of someone, to open a center, or it's part of your family tradition. In this, all the Pai Imanji Santos, that means all the directors of the centers, have their own sensitivities, their own views. So it's extremely plural, you know. The main the main thing that unites all the centers are the entities. So the that means the hierarchies of entities that are channeled by the people. They don't change. So you have the Orishas, you have the Boyaderos, which are people from the sea. You have the Tzigans, you have childs, also sweet childs, all those kind of spirits. But then the way it is done.
Do the centers talk to each other? Do the centers collaborate to grow the religion, to grow the practice? Don't call it a religion, but
no, like there is no organized authority between all the centers. No, but generally, you know, because it's a very big commitment when you're part of this. You know, people go like twice a week. Once a week, they go to what we call mediumship development. So they develop themselves as mediums, and another day is devoted to the ritual itself. And it lasts many hours. So sometimes people change centers, you know. There have been some endeavors to organize Umbanda as a whole, but it's something that is still going on. Yeah.
Thanks, Dana. Alex?
Thank you. I have a question for Kathy and her presentation. For me, it will be interesting if you can explain more this moment about bringing the witness and how it's connected with trauma experience, and especially in the context of social media, when we became involuntary witness every day, and we have to, we face it with a lot of negative information. So how does it work, bring the witness in group therapy or group work? Because if you witness every day, how you can protect yourself and separate this experience?
Sorry, Alexander, I'm not sure what you mean by.
Maybe I'm not understand exactly when you talk about bringing the witness. What does it mean, and how to be connected with re-traumatization experience?
Bringing the weakness?
Bringing in the witness.
Oh, the witness.
Yes.
Bringing in the witness, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, so in this process, we cultivate the witness, which of course it, you know, is talked about in quite a few traditions. And we do that in order that we can have a state of neutrality so that we can look deeper into these issues. I am not a therapist. I'm not a trauma specialist. I just, I'm not sure how to address your question from that level of trauma. When we sit in groups and do this process, we sit with compassion, knowing that, you know, there are parts of self that might surface, that might need attention at another level of work. But in my many years of doing this, it's a very powerful practice, and we feel held in a state of grace and in a state of being held by spirit, by a transcendent power, and great healing can take place. But it does require that you are able to cultivate that place of being in awareness, in having a witness state, having that observer state, that you can look into these different parts of polarized issues that might be arising. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks, Kathy. Chagwa.
Well, thank you, Kathy, Jean-Michel, and Adryanna. I was just thinking a lot about all of you spoke about something very interesting to me. I'm gonna just maybe say the wrong thing, just bear with me. Is that the search for the whole, and through the two very complex, what the humanity has make it complex with the separation of the dual existence, the no dual existence of humanity in relationship with the whole. So when I say this, when I was listening to Jean-Michel talking about Umbanda and this mix of traditions to fulfill the need of belonging in Brazil, is just this mix of these different traditions put it together to fulfill the need of belong for this mix races that happens in Brazil. So, and that went through what Kathy shared with us about what Dabashis was saying about the colonizing, either the colonizer or the colonizer. And is there this the psychology of liberation, and then is that the union of the recognizing that we are one with different types of energies. And the three of you put it beautifully done in a very complex, broad, different presentations. And then one thing that it got it all together was the images of the tarot cards that Adryanna was speaking of, and especially the storytelling of the books and then the images. It's a TV show. I don't know if anyone has seen this TV show or movie where the kids had their animals, and then somebody wants to take the animals from them, and then they are trying to catch the children to take the animals away. And then for me, that was just what these colonizers, or these people that want power in the past, in the present, and maybe in the future, that is what they want to do. They want to take our connection with the cosmic energy. The three of you presented very differently, but for me was just like, wow, how three different approaches can bring something so powerful as the what the Advaita Vedanta will say, the non-dual. And I just want to say thank you, because it was just very refreshing to see how we all can approach one subject matter in a very different views and subjects, and then we go to this sense of where we at this moment we are fighting this, we are fighting, all of us, we are fighting in a way. For me, today I saw it, we're fighting for the recognition of that we are many, and then we have the right to exist, and then we have the right to respect each other, and then we have the right to actually respect the one that makes us all united. There's our planet Earth, and it was just fantastic. I just want to say thank you because I was just like listening, and it touched me in a very very phenomenal way. That how different it was the whole day, but the common sense was this: we are different but united. And just to bring Carl Jung into the picture as the collective unconscious, if we bring the indigenous traditions of the world as the unanimous, right, the energy that is always present, and etc., etc. I just want to say that. Thank you.
Would any of the presenters like to say anything in response?
Thank you for that beautiful reflection and bringing it all together.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I really appreciate how you synthesized that and really brought it into the intuitive and the cosmos, and then also bringing in Carl Jung. Sorry, your box moved. So I just want to echo that. It just feels complete for me, and I appreciate that.
Okay, Chagwa, thank you so much. It was really profound. Thank you. Riza.
It's always hard to ask a question after Chagwa because Chagwa is so articulate and profound. So I think a lot about being in a program that is about psycho-spiritual traditions and wanting it to have some positive impact on the world, not just this airy-fairy thing that's nice and makes us feel good, but something that is transformative on the collective level. And I think all of you spoke to that. And one of the things that came up for me was mysticism and spirituality as a tool in decolonizing. And a couple of you mentioned Christianity and not being a Christian anymore in a Christian era. And we're living in a Christian era because of the cultural imperialism of the United States that continues and is so influenced by that tradition. And initially, colonization was in part a tool, not just of capitalism, but of Christianity. And then Christianity became a tool of, even though it was around for thousands of years longer, Christianity became a tool of colonization. And so it sounds like in these imaginative, creative ways that these spiritualities, old and new, are ways of reclaiming some kind of liberation, some kind of authentic connection with greater, and not always having to completely reject Christianity. And so I kind of, that's how I'm taking it in. But for Jean, for your presentation, I thought a lot about one of the traditions I come from Puerto Rico, Espiritismo, and I know that my great-grandfather was a spiritualist in that tradition, is similar. It's very similar and plays this syncretic role, but same as Brazil, it was brought from Europe by middle-class people. That's how it started, and then it became something of the people. And so I'm just curious about, in that reclaiming of something that still has like the roots through elitism, European supremacy. I don't know. I just some if you have any thoughts about that. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you specifically was just, in the title of your work, you mentioned hybridity, and might that be a part of it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, Umbanda is really, in Brazil, is popularly considered part of Spiritism. So it's Umbandistas, they say they are spirits. And of course, you have the Spiritism, which is more of Allan Kardec. But in Brazil, we had this figure, which is Chico Xavier, I mean, somehow Spiritism became a much bigger thing in Brazil than in Europe. So you have hundreds of books, you have a very big production that is centered on really describing what happens after death through mediums in very, very great detail. But the way I see it, it's my personal take, is that I feel that Umbanda and even the Spiritism of Allan Kardec are steps towards the recovery of a more Gnostic Christianity, a more esoteric way. Because one thing is the Christianity of the church, the dogma of the church, but really in the Gnostic message, you know, what early Christianity was, early Christianity was really extremely plural. So, you know, there were hundreds of groups, as we all know, that had very diversified doctrines. It was a very free movement. And then at a certain point, with uniting with Rome, you know, the Catholic Church became more powerful and everything happened. But I feel that the solution now is to view Christianity in another way and not to completely disregard it. And this is what both Spiritism and Umbanda are trying to do in their own way. I see it as a step towards recovery of Christian Gnosticism.
Thank you. And just because of the title of your paper, would you consider that a form of hybridity?
Yes, it's a form. It's a hybrid product. I mentioned it in a paper all the time. I mean, of course, I didn't read the paper, but yes, it's a hybrid product between very completely different things. And one of the most, I think, the crucial thing is the conflict between monotheism and polytheism, which is really connected to racism in Brazil. That I would say that all the racism was ideologically justified by the fighting of what is the contrary of monotheism? Polytheism. I mean, the massacre of slavery and of indigenous people, it was ideologically justified because they were not monotheistic. And somehow a religion like Umbanda is trying to unite monotheism with polytheism. Of course, it's a contradiction, but it is really what characterizes this hybridity. You know? Yeah. So the polytheism of the entities, but also one God, you know, the principle of unity that we call Oshala. It's called Oshala in Umbanda. I don't know if that answers a bit of what you were asking.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, and I think that it'd be really wonderful to hear Jonathan play a little something for us. That'll kind of bring us back to center. But I do want to thank everyone here and all those who presented and participated today who aren't here. You know, an overriding theme for me today was this kind of tension of opposites between freedom and license, between chaos and order, between multiplicity and unity, and even between polytheism and monotheism. And I kept thinking of Devashisha's, you know, kind of central idea of plurality. How do we live in a plurality? How do we agree to disagree and keep moving forward? And I think that the imagination has a tremendous role to play in that. But anyway, I wanted to say two more things very quickly. First, the presentations were really amazing today. I mean, can I say proud? I'm old enough, I can say proud. I think really proud of the presenters and the extraordinary richness that you guys have brought to this symposium. And Jonathan and I were kind of chatting with one another during the day, and we would love to be able to not to give you guys extra work to do, but we would love to collect the papers and make a journal of them. So I will be approaching you about that and to see if we can maybe get that together so that we have an artifact from this symposium. So thank you. And I would like to turn it over to Jonathan so that he can play us out.
Yes, thanks everybody. Thank you so much, Stefan, for moderating this last panel as well. And we're in the closing now of a very long but extremely inspiring and productive day. I thank all of you for being here. It's amazing how you physically, we have our limitations, but how inspiration, how potential is activated. And for me, this was all happening throughout the day. And I would just be very honored to play a little bit of music from that place as a closing prayer, as an offering, as an experiment, as a way in which I, utilize imagination to kind of sit within the complexities of these thoughts of how is it that I am non-dual, how is it that I am radically plural, how is it that I can use the kind of the cultural horizons as power to struggle against and to wrest power from, how is it that I can connect with cosmological powers as well. And I guess the last thing, how is it that I can connect with where we've been, with history, with tradition, with ancestors. How does this music, or what, how does this offering going to situate where we are now and kind of address some of the problems of our contemporary problems of becoming. And I think one of the aspects that was really important and again a thread throughout the whole day is really, where are we going? And how do we kind of build a future? How do we build a new human, or a new communities, new models, new knowledges? And I think that says a lot about the department in terms of how we cultivate, the scholar practitioner model, the scholar activism, and all of these things. I just felt were really present today and showed up in so many different ways. It was just such an amazingly deep learning experience for me. But I will end with a couple minutes of music. I think Jean-Michel has inspired me to play a song called Brasilia, which is a Coltrane piece. And I had the melody in my head earlier today anyway, but when he started speaking, I don't know, something happened. This is a Coltrane piece, and I will, I think I'm going to improvise and reflect on the 4 cardinal points that we have kind of helped navigate these conversations with today. East, West, Earth, World. Definitely not reducible to any music, to any sound, to any one voice, but definitely something to be engaged with is through experimentation and trial and error. Let's see. A little loud, maybe. Is that a decent volume? Not too loud? Okay.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. That's beautiful.
Thank you, everybody.